What I, as you probably have seen on the source sheets, I wanted to take a little bit of a break from what we had been doing, and spend time talking about the Tefillah l'Shlom Medinah. I thought that was very appropriate for Yom HaAtzmaut, to pick the Tefillah that is connected to the time that we're in right now, and to gain a better understanding. Having personally grown. Yes, question already.
No, I tell you what, because yesterday we talked, I think, about this last week, the women having a minion or not minion.
Yes.
And yesterday I was at the hotel, davening, and the men, they've got their minion and blah, blah, blah. And we're women here, we don't have a minion. Can we organize a minion? Or we don't have to have a minion? Or
So I'm trying. I'm not. Your question could be one of two things. You could either be asking me, and I'm not really sure. You could either be asking me whether or not we could arrange for 10 men to then enable women to come to the minyan, or you're asking for a minyan of women. I'm not which one you're referring to.
The second.
Okay. Now, by that we could want to talk about one of two things. One could be what I guess would be considered the more progressive type of women's minyan, or you could mean, is there any value to 10 women who want to come together and daven together, not necessarily in the more formal way? I'm not sure which one you're asking. The second one. Okay. So if, meaning so exactly. So I think you mean the second one. So it's a very, very good question. I believe, again, having just not thought about this, but on the spot, and that's totally fine. I believe that just like we talked about when we talked about the value of having 10 men with a minyan. So there's no question that from halachic perspective, 10 men is what's considered to be a quorum. It has a halachic basis to it, and 10 women does not have that same status in the world of halacha. Meaning,
because halacha is written by men. Women.
I
just figured.
I'm not gonna get into that. There's no question that the status of a minyan refers to men. I think that has to do with a lot more with. I think it has more to do with what we've discussed in the past, which is the concept that in the end of the day, the difference between men and women and their halachic obligations and their availability and many other aspects. We can have a longer discussion about that separately. That being said, does that mean that if a group of people come together to daven as a minyan, does that not have a certain power to it? I think from a psychological perspective, some of the reasons we talked about as being the value of davening with a minyan was when you daven with a lot of people, you're more aware of the needs of the community, and you're sensitive to other things outside of yourself. I think that definitely applies to a group of people who are coming together, even a group of women who are coming together. From a halachic perspective, is it considered to be a minyan similar to men? No. But do I believe that there is a power to women coming together and davening together? Even if not from a strictly halachic perspective, not necessarily, but I believe that I could see that being very, very powerful. I can see that there being a power to that in terms of psychological, in terms of spiritual. So therefore, I certainly think there's a value to it for those who find that meaningful. But there's no question that from a halachic perspective, it doesn't have the same status. Yeah. So a group for Tehillim, there's lots of different opportunities for people to come together, and that value is important. But it's not going to be the same type of value as it would be from a halachic perspective. Okay, so let's get to our topic. Tefillah l'Shlom Medinah. As somebody who grew up in a modern Orthodox community, I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey. I could probably tell you the entire Tefillah l'Shlom Medinah by heart. I can sing it for you. I can say it for you. I won't do either of those. Don't worry. But I think that symbolizes the fact that Tefillah l'Shlom Medinah certainly has become something that is incredibly meaningful and foundational to the modern Orthodox Dati Le'umi communities. And I would also add that after making Aliyah, it took on a certain even more meaning, and I'm sure many of you feel that same way. But I also know that until I started to research this, I never really looked closely at Tefillah l'Shlom Medinah in order to really understand what is the Tefillah all about, the content of the Tefillah, where the Tefillah comes from. There's a number of interesting references within the Tefillah to other Tefillot, and I also believe that if you take a closer look, it actually reveals something very unique about us as a people that I'd like to highlight. Sure.
I'm not talking about Israel, but in Chutz La'aretz, why is it that the more
The none places.
I don't know what to say.
Okay, so it's a good question. So let's. Okay, good question. We'll touch it. We'll touch on that. We'll touch on that. Hopefully, when we get to it, I want to take a step back, and again, I'm going to go a little bit fast, and I might even maybe we'll even take a break from the questions just because my fault, because we started a little bit late, and I want to make sure that we cover the ground. We're going to touch upon that a little bit. But before that, we have to understand that before there was a concept of what we call Tefillah l'Shalom Medinah, which usually we're referring to the prayer for the state of Israel, there was historically a concept of a Tefillah l'Shalom HaMalchut, that wherever you lived and wherever a person resided, there was a concept that a person should daven for that government. Where does that come from? So if you look at source number 1, we already see the concept existing in Sefer Yirmiyahu, V'dirshu et Shlom ha'ir. Asher higleti etchem shama, you should seek the peace of the city where I have sent you into Galut. V'hit palalu ba'ada, you should daven for the rulership or the leadership of whichever community you find yourself. El Hashem, ki bishloma yeh lachem shalom. Because if they have peace, then you're going to have peace. Okay, so the simple understanding right now is it's in your best interests to make sure that everything is going well, and therefore you should be davening for the security and the peace of the country in which you live. We see this as well in a relatively well-known Mishnah and Pirkei Avot, source number 2. Rabbi Chanina, Sgan HaKohanim Omer, Havei mitpalel bishloma shel malchut. You should daven for the peace and for the security of the kingdom. She'il malei Mora'ah ish et re'eu chayim bila'o. Because if not for the concept of fear of the community, then there would be, best way of saying this, there would be anarchy. Man would swallow each other, kill each other. If there was not some kind of kingdom or what we would call government in modern day systems, there would be anarchy. And if there was anarchy, everyone would be in danger, things would be crazy, and therefore there is the concept of davening or praying for the welfare of the country in which you reside. Now, what's the reason for this? Why is this important? Correct. And as Avram says to, yes, correct, 100%. Now, why is this needed? Now, we already discussed that we obviously benefit from it, but there's actually a couple of different interpretations in the amongst the Mefarshim as to why it's important to daven for the government in which you find yourself. First look at Rashi. Rashi in source number 3 notes that this idea even has hints from the avoda in the Beit HaMikdash. Bishloma shel malchut, Rashi in Pirkei Avot says, we're going to skip the brackets, afilu be'umot ha'olam, even if you find yourself living in Galus, you should still daven. Shekain matzinu, because we found shehayu nodrim nidarim v'nidavot bishvilam, because we OUisrael used to bring korbanot for the other nations. Ukemoshi matzinu b'shivim parim shayu Yisrael miviyim b'chag al shivim ha'umot. Okay, because we saw that there were 2 things. Number 1, sometimes the other nations would bring their own korbanot. Number 2, we even see on Sukkot, we bring 70 korbanot. Why? To correspond to the 70 nations. So there already is this concept, even within the Beit HaMikdash, where we would bring korbanot in order to daven, in order to pray for the other nations. Now, why is this important? Look at source number 4. Rabbeinu Yonah first brings an interesting perspective, which is a little bit different from what we were saying, but I think is still important. Zeh ha'inyan, Ratzalomar, Sheyesh le'adam lehitpalel al shlom kol ha'olam. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, what's the idea here? Let's take a step back, says Rabbeinu Yonah. This isn't just a practical. This isn't just, I want to be safe, so therefore I'm going to daven that the country should be good. There's a value here. There's a value of we as Jews should always want there to be peace in the world. I think this is an important perspective for us to be keeping in mind, in that we as Jews, although we have our unique needs, and we should be certainly focusing firstly on those needs, as Jews, we should always have and strive to want there to be peace in the world. We should always care about what's going on in the world because we should want there to be peace in the world. And we should care about the pain of others. If there is a tragedy happening on another side of the world, we shouldn't just be putting our heads in the sand and saying we don't care, it's not us. We should, on some level, care about that. V'chein darkam shel tzadikim, and this is how tzadikim act. K'moshe Amar David Amelech alav hashalom, va'ani b'chalotam levushi sak, says David Amelech in Tehillim. When they get sick, I put on sackcloth. Aniti b'tzom, I'll fast. Nafshi she'ein le'adam la'asot tachlonav uvakashotov excuse me, litzorchav levad. Because a person shouldn't only care about their own needs, we should care about the needs of the world as a whole. So Rabbeinu Yonah's explanation here is, why should we be davening for the shalom, for the peace of the malchut? Very simply, we should always want there to be peace in the world. That should be something we desire. Again, doesn't mean that it's necessarily more important than our own personal needs, but we should be taking the perspective that bigadol, as we would like the world to be a peaceful place, and when things happen in the world that are not, it should bother us at least a little bit. That's Rabbeinu Yonah. Another suggestion, which Mefarshim don't say here specifically, but it's an obvious one, is why should we be davening for the country in which we live? Hakarat hatov. We should be thankful for the opportunity. Again, not talking about not right now Medinah Israel. Whatever country you find yourself in, we should be davening for them out of appreciation for the fact that the opportunity that we have to live there. Okay. And the third explanation would be, why should we be davening for the country? Is what we saw before, because when they're safe, then we're safe. Because if the country functions normally, if the country functions as the way it should, then that also leads us to be safe. Look at source number 5. That's the Mitzudat David on that pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Kishiyeh ba shalom, yeh gam lachem shalom. When they have peace, when the country that we live in is peaceful and acts the way it should, then we'll also have peace. And then he quotes the pasuk, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Okay, so what we've seen so far, and again, this isn't specific to our specific topic per se, but it's an important introduction, is that there already existed from the times of the Mishnah the concept that a person should be davening for the country in which you live, either because we value peace as a value in general, we want peace there to be peace in the world, or because we out of hakarat hatov, or for our practical personal considerations that if there's peace in the country in which we live, then we'll be safer as well.
And how about if the country there doesn't want us to be there, like what happened to China?
Again, certainly there's going to be unique situations. Certainly there's unique situations, and I don't want to get into whether or not the shuls in Germany said that tefillah or not. Again, I think we should be davening that there should be peace, because again, I'm not going to get into the specific situation. Obviously, Germany was a very unique situation. But I think, yeah, it's a very good question. I think in general, our approach has been that we continue to daven for the peace of the community, hoping that will improve things. But obviously, everyone has to take. That would be a community-based question, depending on the unique situation. But I think it's also important to note that when we talk about hakarat hatov is two levels. Number one, we should be feeling hakarat hatov again in places where we're able to have that hakarat hatov. But I think it's also important for the outsiders to know that we give that hakarat hatov. Meaning, it's important for communities and for the governments to know that on a weekly basis, the Jewish community prays for the welfare of the country. That could be an important piece to this. Obviously, there are going to be unique situations. Now, we're going to skip a couple of sources just because of time. What some of the other sources and the Pirushim that I brought you here outline is that obviously the Mishnah had talked about malchus, talked about kingship. It's not just kingdom; it's any ruling entity. If it's a government, it's a government, and that specifically it mentioned malchus, but not melech. Why didn't it say king? Because malchus shows it refers to any and all types of leaders, not just the king, but any leaders. It even says you should maybe pray for your city leadership and for your state leadership. Obviously, every country has its own government system. But the idea being this value applies not just on the federal level, not on the national level, but also on the state level. If you're in America or whatever that would apply in your unique country. And if you look at source number 9, this isn't the first one, but this is one of the sources where we even see this explicitly being mentioned as something that was instituted as part of the tefillah. Source number 9, very briefly. Acharei hahaftarah, says the Aruch HaShulchan, nahagu lomar yukum purkan, umisha berach, ubracha lamelech. So already as part of the tefillah was the concept, we say yukum purkan, we say the misha berach, and then we say the bracha for the king. And that was already instituted, and that has existed for many years. Now we get to I was talking about, again, in general, the state in which you live. What about the Tefillah L'Shalom Medina? So obviously, things shifted a little bit in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel. With the establishment of the State of Israel, Now the concept became not just to have a tefillah for the country in which you live, but to have the concept of having a tefillah for the state of Israel, that no matter where you are, no matter where you live, you should also be davening for the welfare of this newfound Medinah. Now, there's a huge debate, and we're not going to get into the debate because it's a scholarly debate regarding who exactly authored this specific text, the Mishaberach that we know. What seems clear, is that it was a combination of two chief rabbis at the time, Rav Herzog and Rav Meir ben Uziel, as well as the well-known poet Shai Agnon. It was a combination of the two. Now, who was the main author, and who was the one who kind of added on? That's a big debate. There are many who claim, specifically those who served with Rav Herzog, who claimed that Rav Herzog was the main author of the text, and that it was sent to Shai Agnon in order to make corrections and edits. There are others who suggest that no, Shai Agnon was the main author, and it was just done later on in conjunction with some of the chief rabbis. Okay, it's a very, very interesting debate, and we're not going to get into what's right and what's wrong, but there's clear that there is a combination of rabbinic leadership, as well as, and we can see it from the language, as well as beautiful authorship, and bringing in Shai Agnon and his skills was something that was a part of this debate, of this text. Excuse me.
Could you please repeat the three partners?
The three partners were Rav Herzog, Chief Rabbi Rav Herzog, Rav Ben Sion Meir Uziel, who was also the Chief Rabbi at the time. Now, again, he's mentioned less in general, but I think he was part of it. And then the third was Shai Agnon. Shai Agnon, the well-known author and poet. Well, now what I'd like to do is focus on a couple of aspects of it. The first one I'm going to do is focus on what I guess has become the most controversial phrase, quote unquote, in Tefillah Shabbat Medinah. With that, we'll touch upon the question you asked before. And then after that, I'd really like to go through the text and show you to see how it's really amazing to see how this is a text, a modern Tefillah that was built off of older Tefillah, many of them that we're familiar with. So let's start with the phrase that has become the most controversial. Reshit. This is now, we're going to go to source number 10. The phrase that has become some more controversial than others is the phrase, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, right? We say, Barech Ed Medinat Yisrael, God should bless Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. What does Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu mean? The beginning of probably the best way to phrase it is the flowering of the redemption, the beginning of the growth of the redemption. Now, why is this controversial? Because this really gets us into a big debate, which is, are we currently living in the times of Geula or not? Meaning, the times that we're living in right now, are these times of redemption, or are these times of potential redemption, possible redemption, pre-redemption? And this is a big debate, even we're talking now within the modern Orthodox, the Dati Leumi, we're not even touching right now yet, the more Haredi world. Even within Dati Leumi world, this is actually a very, very interesting debate. Now, in order to really understand this, we're not going to spend too much time on this, because this we could spend many hours discussing this. There's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of different shades. But I wanted to just bring some of the discussions. I think it's important to understanding this phrase. And the truth is, to really understand this, we need to start with the Gemara in source number 10. The Gemara is discussing the order of the brachot of Shmona Esrei. And it's discussing, going through each of the brachot. It lists the different brachot in Shmona Esrei, and it talks about what is the content of each bracha. So says the Gemara in Mesechet Megillah, Ma ra'u lomar geula bishvi'it. Why is the bracha of geula, the bracha of Ga'al Yisrael, that God redeems Israel, why is it the seventh bracha? Why number 7? Why not number 6? Why not number 10? Why the 7th? Amar Rava, says Rava, mitoch she'asidin liga'el bishvi'it. Because we believe, there is a concept that we believe that we are going to be redeemed during the 7th millennia. I should stay over here. Okay. We're going to be redeemed during the 7th millennia. Okay. This is based on another Gemara, where the Gemara discusses that there were 6 millennia that were going to be 2, 2, and 2. Again, I'm not getting into all the details, but once we enter the 7th millennia, that is when we believe Mashiach is going to come. Now, this is also very important because we're actually approaching that. We're actually approaching the 6th millennia, and the question is, what happens during the 6th millennia? Are we right? We're now in 5785. It's pretty close. So what exactly this Gemara means is a subject for debate. But what the Gemara clearly seems to be saying is that during the 7th millennia, which we will enter once we hit 6,000, 7th millennia will be the times of Geula. Ask the Gemara, wait a second, but we have another Gemara. Veha Amar Mar, Bishishit Kolot. During the 6th millennia will be kolot, will be much noise. seems to be a reference to just a lot of things going on. Bishvi'it, during the 7th millennia, milchamot, will have wars. B'motzei shvi'it, at the end of the 7th millennia, ben David ba, the Mashiach is going to come. Now, again, it's important to know that this is why it's very, very hard to really be able to people ask questions, when's Mashiach? Tell me all about Mashiach, what's it going to be like? There are many Gemaras that talk about Mashiach, and they're very, very hard to understand. And we don't really understand what they mean, and therefore everything we take has to be taken with a grain of salt. So you have here right now one source which says Mashiach is going to be starting in the 7th millennia, and another Gemara that says it's going to be at the end of the 7th millennia. It's a big difference, okay? But for our purposes, the answer of the Gemara is going to be very, very important. Says the Gemara, wait a second, you have a contradiction. You told me that Mashiach is going to come in the during the 7th millennia, and another Gemara says during the 7th millennia we're going to have wars. It's going to be pre-Mashiach. Answers the Gemara, Milchama nami itchalta digeulahi. Answers the Gemara, even the wars that are going to be taking place during the 7th millennia, that is itchalta digeula. Itchalta digeula means this is now the beginning of the redemption. Who says redemption has to only be when we're sitting on our, sitting down and relaxing? Even the wars that we have to go through, they are part of the process of redemption, and therefore there is no contradiction. The Gemara that said that there's going to be wars, those wars are going to be part of the process of redemption. What this Gemara has introduced, and this is a fundamental question and point, which is that people sometimes think of redemption as being this one moment in time when everything's going to change, we're going to hear the shofar blast, everything's going to be different. And maybe, and this is what the Gemara is hinting to, is that redemption may be a process that takes place over time. And it may have wars in it. It may have ups, it may have downs, it may not be linear, it may go up and down. And therefore, the concept of whether or not we're in the redemption or not in the times of the redemption depends how you define redemption. Does redemption mean only when everything is perfect and we don't have to deal with wars and everything is great? Or can redemption be a process that unfolds over time, maybe even over a long period of time? And that's going to be an important question regarding this debate of whether or not we should include in the Tefillah L'Shlema Medinah the phrase Rishit Tzmichat Gulatenu. We're now in the flowering of the redemption. So the first, I don't want to say he's the first person, he's not the first person, but the person who is known to have developed this concept most famously, the concept that now, with the return of the state of Israel, and really even before that, we are now in this time, the beginning of the Geula, was, as many of you know, Rav Kook. Rav Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who actually did not live during the time of the establishment of the state of Israel, but he was the chief rabbi much earlier. He already, in his writings, before the establishment of the state of Israel, as people were starting to come home, begins to talk in the language of Geula. We're seeing the beginning of Geula unfold. Look at source number 11, just to see a couple of examples. Again, Rav Kook, these are from some of his letters. He's writing to people who supported the efforts to rebuild the state of Israel. Hineni levarech et kivodo me'omek levavi. I want to bless you from the depth of my heart, bibracha ne'emana, with a deep blessing, with a faithful blessing. Shetichazkena yadav ba'avodat hakodesh. I want to strengthen you with the avodat kodesh shel binyan amenu al eretz chemdatenu. That you're rebuilding our nation on the land that we have desired. V'hazchut hagadol hazeh shel bisurat reshit hatza'ad shel tzmichat keren yeshuot Yisrael. Okay, and he says, and you have the zchut to be a part of the first step in the beginning of the salvation of Am Yisrael. Okay, so again, it's very initial language, but it's this language of the Yeshua is beginning. The salvation is starting. Look at source number 12. Source number 12, again, right now we'll just read the underlined part. He makes a reference to the concept of Reshit Tzmichat Yeshuatenu, the beginning of the flowering of our salvation. Interesting. What's the difference between Yeshuatenu and what we say, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu? What's the difference between Yeshua and Geula? Yeshua can be one time. What did someone I heard? Okay, Yeshua could refer to any salvation. Geula is a language that refers to something specific. To me also, and I'm just my own interpretation, Yeshua sounds more like I'm being saved from something. Salvation seems to me to imply like I'm in straits and I'm being saved. whereas Geula is a much larger, more communal type of, again, I think they can be used interchangeably, and I think you're correct, but to me, Yeshua sounds more like save me. I need the Yeshua, as opposed to the Geula, which is a much larger bigger type of process. So we see already Rav Kook starts to talk about this language. Now, what's the basis for this? Why does Rav Kook believe that we're in the beginning of this? Now, this is a much longer conversation, but I brought for you a couple of sources that this camp, those who believe that we're in now, we've begun the process of redemption. There's a few sources that seem to indicate that this might be the case. If you look at source number 13, this is a well-known pasuk in Yechezkel, where the Yechezkel describes what we know as kibbutz galiyot, that Kadosh Baruch Hu promises that at the times of Mashiach, Hashem will gather us from all over the world. V'lakachti etchem min hagoyim, I will take you from the nations. V'kibatzi etchem mikol ha'aratzot, I will gather you from all of the lands. Ve'viti etchem el admatchem, and I'll bring you back to your land. Says Rav Kook in source number 14, he's describing the return of Am Yisrael to the land of Israel, and he says this is clearly a fulfillment of that prophecy. Yeshnam, source number 14, Yeshnam od inyanim gdolim v'nechbadim la'atzia. There are many other issues and things that we could suggest. V'ha'et la'asoti be'ezrat Hashem. But now is the time to do. Now is the time to act. Ki pakad Hashem et amo. Hashem has remembered his nation. Umi mizrach umi ma'arav. From the east and the west. Mitzafon umiyam. From the north and from the south. Ba'im achenu hanidachim. All those who have been pushed away have now returned home. Tziona yishalu derechena pneihem. What is Tziona yishalu? What's that a reference to? Exactly. Halo Tzion Tishali, right? Meaning he's using the language that Tzion Yishalu, they're returning, they're coming back, they're looking for it. Tzion. Ve'ein safek, says Rav Kook, shatnua hagdola hazot hi. Itchalta de Geula. So he's using the language of the Gemara. The Gemara referred to the wars as Itchalta de Geula. Says Rav Kook, it's clear that this coming home is part of the beginning of the redemption. That's one source. I apologize, just because of time.
And he also uses the totality, the same.
Yes, sure, of course. As in Shemot, absolutely, correct, absolutely. Now, another source, again, one other source for this idea that maybe we're approaching in the times of Geula. Source number 15 is a Gemara Masechet Shabbat. Amar Shmuel, Ein bein ha'olam hazeh limot ha'mashiach ela shiabud galuyot bilvad. There is no difference between our days and the days of Mashiach, except for us being under the subjugation of Galut. Okay? Which means that when we're under the subjugation of other nations, that is Galus. That is when we're not, the implication, according to many, would be, once we now have our own country, we have our own sovereign nation, we are no longer under Shiabud Galuyot. Some will claim that is one of the moments where we've begun the Geula. If you look at source number 16, I brought you a quote, again, from a book describing this is Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, which is Rav Kook's son. So he was alive and very much active during the time when the establishment of the state of Israel, during the 1967 war. He was here when we actually did have a sovereign nation, and he suggests that it was during those, the fact that we now have our own country, we're a sovereign nation, that itself is certainly a sign of Geula. Look at source number 16. Yes, so he was around during much of this. Rav Tzvi Yehuda taught that the Geula was occurring in our day. It was coming to fruition into the Jewish people's return to the land of Israel through the restoration of Israeli sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael and through a widespread return to Torah. All of these facets of Geula brought a clearer vision of Hashem's rule to the world. Okay, so based on what we've seen so far, it would be very appropriate that if we have a tefillah that's giving a bracha to the state of Israel, that we would include Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, because it seems, according to this approach, that we are now in the beginning, or we've started the stages of Geula. However, this is not so simple. There is another camp, even within the Dati Le'umi world, and that is the camp that I guess was represented most, but is not solely represented by, but represented most by Rav Soloveitchik. Soloveitchik was under the impression, and he felt that the establishment of the city, and by the way, he shifted in his opinion. We're not going to get into it now, but he shifted in his opinion regarding the state of Israel over the years. He went from being ahead of the Aguda to then being ahead of the Mizrahi movement and supportive of the establishment of the state of Israel. And in many different places, he would talk about how the establishment of the state of Israel was an opportunity. It might be the Geula, it might not be the Geula. That's up to us. If you look at source number 17, I brought for you a summary of his opinion. Again, there's a lot more to talk about here, but we're just giving you the, as we say, the Rashi Prakim. In a number of cases, the Rav was explicit about his opposition to attributing a messianic character to the state. This cannot be the ultimate redemption, he said, since the Jewish people have not yet achieved real independence and sovereignty, as demonstrated, for example, by the fact that the Secretary of State of the U.S. can summon the Israeli Prime Minister to Washington at will. I'm not going to talk about whether that's relevant today or not. Under such circumstances, the Rav once explained, there is no real independence, no real sovereignty. Only with the arrival of Mashiach, the Jewish people will really appear on the stage of history. In a 1957 letter, the Rav succinctly summarized his approach to Zionism as a third halachic approach, in between that of the non-Zionist Haredim, whose eyes are shut and reject the significance of the state, and the Messianic Zionist, quote-unquote, dreamers, who adopt a completely positive stance to the point where they identify the state with the fulfillment of the highest goal of our historical and meta-historical destiny. His own approach would be positively inclined towards the state and would express gratitude for its establishment, but would not attach excessive value to the point of its glorification and deification.
What's that mean?
Which means that, again,
The end of that sentence, what does that mean?
he believes that there are certain people who glorified the state of Israel to the point where they were taking it too far. I don't want to speak for Soloveitchik. I don't want to speak for Soloveitchik. And again, I think what he said here is what he said. I understand it to basically mean Rav Soloveitchik's approach, and there are many of his Talmidim who felt that way. It was a much more, a less, a more modern approach is the right way to say it, which basically says, again, we're not debating that now. I know, but we're not debating it now. Rav Soloveitchik's approach was much more of an approach of, this is a good thing. Whether or not it will turn into the Geula is something we don't know. We can't necessarily say this is the Geula or not the Geula. All we can say is this is a positive thing, which if we do what we're supposed to do, we should turn it into, it's an opportunity, as I said before. A watershed moment, and that is something that we can turn into depending on how we act. Now, this has ramifications in many, many different ways. What I want to focus on is the ramification for the Tefillah L'Shalom Medinah. Based on this approach, there are many shuls, even until today, who are Zionist shuls, who are supportive of the state of Israel, and will say the Tefillah L'Shalom Medinah, but will leave out this phrase, so we'll leave out the phrase, Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu, or they will add in one word. And the word they will add in is Shetehei Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu. That we daven that it should be the beginning of the redemption. In which case they're saying, I'm not going to attribute this to being the beginning of the redemption. I'm going to daven that we should take advantage of the opportunity that it should turn into the beginning of the redemption. And that is a fascinating discussion. And as I said, this has many ramifications, many different camps, how you deal with political questions, how you deal with many halachic questions, how you look at the state of Israel. There's many, many nafkaminot, as we say, practical differences between how you look at the state of Israel. And this is a much larger, and I'm happy to have a conversation with people outside of the shir. That's not the topic of this year. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to highlight the differences in the text. Now, just to quickly, I'm sorry, just because of time, I'm going to, but just to reference the question.
What did he say?
That was a lot of this were quotes from Rav Soloveitchik. These were quotes.
How did he?
I believe he said Shetehei, but I'm not sure. In his shul, I'm not sure. That's what you meant. In his shul, what did he actually say? I believe the Shetehei, that added word was coming from his, but I'm not 100% sure. It's a good question. Now, in terms of why other communities don't say this, and the more yeshivish Haredi communities, that has more to do with their question and attitude towards the state of Israel, which is a much more complex conversation out from here. But it seems to me that these are communities that either don't support or are ambivalent about the state of Israel, and therefore they don't say this tefillah. Whether they should or they shouldn't is a separate conversation. Okay, what I'd like to do now is spend the little bit of time left that we have and talk a little bit about the text itself. I brought for you the text in source number 19. I numbered the lines so that we can reference them a little bit. And what's really amazing, we're not going to go through the whole thing and translate it now just because of time. But what I want to show you is, if you look at the text itself, and this might even be something that you knew about but you never thought about, much of the text of this tefillah are references to other tefillot that we say often. I'll give you an example. So first of all, if you look at the phrase on line number 2, the phrase "Hagein aleh be'efrat chastecha," that you should protect it with all of your chesed. That's actually a line that we actually say in the tefillah for the malchut. Meaning the earlier text that we talked about earlier in this year, where there was a tefillah that people were saying for their local community, that line is there, and we actually now took it and they brought it here also, which means that even when they're writing a tefillah for the state of Israel, they're borrowing language from a text that already existed, because again, we're davening for the government. I'm davening for my government, or I'm davening for their government, and therefore some language is the same. But even more than that, if you look at line number 2. Continue on the line we just said. Hagein aleh be'efrat chastecha ufros aleh sukat shlomecha. What does that remind us of? Where do we say that line? Not in Shemona Esrei, close. Not Shabbat, not just Shabbat. Mariv. The bracha of Shomer Amo Yisrael La'adha. The bracha of Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu, that line. Ufros aleh sukat shlomecha. But even more than that, if you look at the beginning of line number 3, V'takneim be'etzah tova milifanecha, and you should guide them in having good advice. Where's that from? The same tefillah. Look at source number 20. The bracha of Hashkivenu. We say, Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, spread out upon us the sukkah of your peace. V'saknenu be'etzah tova milifanecha. And you should give us good advice in front of you. So we see that they took that line, they broke it up and put it in different parts of the tefillah. There's more. And by the way, I just want to make there's an interesting reference to this. I don't know the significance of this. But what is the bracha of Hashkivenu? Let me just to highlight this because it's really fascinating. There's a whole concept. Yes, but even more than that. That was also Baruch Hashem Leolam. But here's the thing. There is a halacha, which we haven't discussed yet in our class, that there is something called smichat geula letefillah. There is a halacha that the last bracha that you should be saying before Shemona Esrei should be the bracha connected to geula. Which is why in Shacharit, what bracha do we say right before we say Shemona Esrei? Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael. But here's the problem. In Mariv, at night, what do we say? We also say Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, but where do we say it? We say it earlier, and then we say Hashkivenu. So asks the Gemara in source number 21, we're not going to see it inside. Says the Gemara, wait a second, if you have to have Geula before Shemona Esrei, how do we insert this bracha of Hashkivenu in between the bracha of Ga'al Yisrael and Shemona Esrei? And you know what the Gemara answers? Geula arichtahi. The Gemara says Hashkivenu is a longer form of Geula. It's within the same topic of redemption. It's just a longer form of that bracha, and therefore it counts as Ga'al Yisrael, and there's no problem. You have a smicha, you have Ga'al Yisrael before Shemona Esrei. But that language of Geula Arichta, what does that sound like? It sounds like Itchalta de Geula, Reshit Smichat Geula Teinu. I don't know the significance of this, but I think it's fascinating that one of the brachot that they took to use within this text is a bracha that uses a similar language of Geula being a longer process. Geula sometimes being longer and not being short. Again, I'm just throwing it out there as something that I found fascinating. Okay, let's keep going. That's why. That's a different. Correct. Right. That's why the Gra didn't say V'shamru. That's a different point. Look at the Gemara. We're going to skip a little bit. Look at line number 10. Line number 10 back in the Tefillah L'Shema Medinah. V'yached livavenu li'ahava u'liyira et shemecha. What does that remind us of? Close, right before Shema, Ahava Rabbah. The bracha of Ahava B'Sorosecha v'Dabek V'Yached Livavenu Li'Ahava U'Lira. So here we have the line from bracha of Ahava Rabbah being incorporated into this tefillah. We then continue Ushlach Lanu Mehera ben David Mashiach Tzidkecha. Where is that Mashiach Tzidkecha from? Al Yedei David Mashiach Tzidkecha. Shemona Esrei on Shabbos. Okay, keep going. Look at source number 11. Line number 11. Hofa bahadar gaon uzecha al kol yoshvei tevel artzecha v'yomar kol asher neshama be'apo Hashem Elokei Yisrael melech umalchuto b'kol mashala. Rosh Hashanah davening. That line is from Rosh Hashanah davening, where we daven to Hashem that the entire world should accept upon themselves God's reign. And so you have a tefillah here which we're familiar with, and there's more. But these are just some of the highlights and ones that we're mostly, phrases that we're mostly familiar with, where the authors of this tefillah didn't just write a tefillah. They incorporated so much of existing tefillot as expressions of our hope and our future into this tefillah. But there's one other point that I'd like to highlight, which I think is the most important, perhaps the most important point in my opinion. That's why I want to make sure that we get to it. This tefillah is very, very interesting. If we follow the flow of the tefillah, it starts in what I would say the particular, and then it moves to the universal. We begin with Avinu Shebashamayim. We'll now go back to source number 19, where you have the prayer itself. Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzor Yisrael v'Goalo, Barechet Medinat Yisrael, Rishit Michat Goldin, if you include that. Okay, so we dive in that Hashem should take care of the Medinah, and then we dive in that you should bring peace to the country, and that you should chazek et Meginei Eretz Kachenu. Who are the Meginei Eretz Kachenu? Who are the protectors of the land? We're davening for the Chayalim and for the police. We're davening that to protect those who are. Then we go to Ve'et Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael Pikadna B'chol Artzos Bezureihem. And then we say, Hashem, all of our people, now we've totally left Medinah Yisrael. Now what are we talking about? All the Jews in Gullus. All the Jews in Gullus. Achenu Beit Yisrael, all of our brothers and sisters who are elsewhere, who are scattered throughout the world, bring them back. What does that have to do with Medinah Yisrael? 1 second. Then we keep going and we say, V'yached levavenu li ahava. We're in line number 10. I'm sorry if those of you are confused. We're now in source number 19. We're going through the text. It should be in 19. I hope you all have it. Okay. V'yached levavenu la'ava li'yirat shemecha. And please help us and then guide our hearts to serve you. L'shmor et kol divrei Toratecha. That we should be able to keep the Torah and the mitzvot. It's certainly an important thing. But what does that have to do with God protecting the state of Israel? And then, how do we end? Hofa bahadar gaon uzecha al kol yoshvei tevel artzecha v'yomar kol asher neshama bi'apo Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Who's that a tefillah for? The whole world. So we've started with protect Medinah Yisrael, protect the people of Israel, protect the soldiers of Israel. Oh, by the way, also those Jews who are in Gullus, bring them home. Oh, and also we should keep the Torah and give us the ability to keep the Torah and mitzvos. And God, please bring peace to the whole world, and the whole world should serve you. That's very nice, but it seems like we're a little bit off topic here. This should be a tefillah for the Shlom Medinah. Why all of a sudden are we davening for so many important things that don't necessarily directly seem to be impacted by the Medinah? So I believe the answer is as follows. I would suggest the establishment of the state of Israel, and certainly the writing of this tefillah, was a watershed moment where it wasn't just one moment of the creation of a state. It was thousands of years of tefillot and of dreams and of hopes that were now beginning to develop and beginning to be responded to. And so when crafting, what do we want to get out of the state of Israel? Not just to have a state for ourselves. Everything that's listed in this tefillah are the hopes and dreams of Yisrael that we hope will be realized through Medinah Yisrael. And so when you're crafting a tefillah about Medinah Yisrael, it can't just be, protect them physically and make sure that they're safe and they're whatever. It needs to be expressed through all the hopes and dreams that we hope will result from the establishment of the state of Israel, and what we hope it will bring. We hope that the establishment of the state of Israel will bring home all of our brothers and sisters at the right time in Rabbi Amenu. And we hope that through that we'll be able to grow in our Torah and mitzvot. We hope that it will lead to a flowering of Shmirat HaMitzvot throughout all of Am Yisrael. And ultimately, we hope that our state and our country will be in Or Lagoyim and bring the entire world to realization of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so when the authors sat down to draft this, they said, this isn't just about a tefillah to daven to protect this. It's what do we want the state of Israel to be? What do we want Medinah Yisrael to represent? And all of those hopes and dreams they poured into this tefillah. They culled from tefillot all over, from the tefillah of Rosh Hashanah, from the tefillah of Shabbos, from the tefillah of Mariv, from the tefillah of Avarabba. They took from all over, they said, through this, we're expressing what we hope Medinah Yisrael can be and should be. And so every Shabbos, when we say this, we're not just davening that Hashem should protect us and everyone should be safe. It's a reminder of what we're supposed to be doing, what our purpose is, what our goal is here in Medinah Yisrael. That through the establishment of the state of Israel, we're able to bring about a home for all of the Jewish people. we're able to bring about a increased observance in Torah and mitzvot, increased Torah learning, increased involvement in the Jewish community, and most importantly, in awareness of God to the entire world. And I believe that's what the authors were hoping to do. And so it's just for us to think about as we approach Yom Ha'atzmaut and every Shabbos, when we sit and we say this tefillah and we say it with kavanah and we say it with meaning, we should remember that it's not just about protecting this land, but it's about all the hopes and dreams that OUisrael have had and continue to have. Whether it's tzmichat gulatenu, whether it's reshit tzmichat gulatenu, whether it's shetehei reshit tzmichat gulatenu, most importantly, it's about understanding and thinking about and strengthening ourselves in what it should be and what we hope it will be, Be'ezrat Hashem. I'm sorry that I didn't take questions. I'm happy to take questions outside now, but I wanted to give you a break.